Okay, we're on.
Hey everybody, it is Wayne and Mark, and we're not quite started yet. We are recording, but we will get started in a little bit. Question for you, Mark. How do we, so I know what you've done with Zoom. So now all of our sessions we've been doing on Webinar Jam since we started, where are those saved?
Okay, so I download them and they're in Kajabi. So there's one a separate um, segment of our course. So all those videos are in one place.
Okay,
Yeah.
sounds all right. Um, Well, hey, everybody, it is a minute until the top of the hour, and we're just barely going to get started here in just a little bit. We'll wait for just a second while we see who else comes in live. Again, the vast majority of our viewership is not live. We do these live just because we think that it's good for our audience, and I'm moving my camera here a little bit. I keep saying that I'm going to get this mounted a little higher, and then I don't do it. But there we go. And most of our viewership is on replays, but we like doing them live because we're trying to be current in terms of topics that are out there and that are relevant today, and maybe they weren't so relevant a week ago or a month ago or whatever. So anyway, we're going to get started now. Hey, everybody, it's Wayne and Mark, and we are at Talk with Wayne, which is our Thursday session that we do most Thursdays. There are a few of them when I'm not available, and we do replays on those days. We just passed, by the way, and we didn't even talk about it, our 8th anniversary of the EAT community. We started June 6th in 2016. So this would be our 8th anniversary. But here's even a more relevant anniversary, which I don't think I've mentioned yet, is this coming year is the 100th anniversary of Dennis Weaver's birth. Pretty cool, huh, Mark? So if Dennis was still alive, he'd be 100. Unfortunately, he died now close to more than 10 years ago. And he was the founder of the Institute of Economics. And it's because of him that we have an EAT community, and the Economic Action Team is the longer version of our EAT community name. And he's the one who invented the word economics, which again, I say it often because still people don't know what it means. It is showing people how they can make some money making the planet better. So a person who's being economic is making some money making the planet better. And there's a lot of ways to do that. And I tend to focus on a lot of I'll just call it the food or water related ways which we deal with those things, water, food, whatever, and make the planet better. But Dennis, for example, was mainly interested in vehicles, and he was a gearhead, as we call people who like vehicles. And he was interested in how can we make the planet better by having a better source of fuel for vehicles rather than fossil fuels. And so he was a huge proponent of hydrogen as a source of fuel for vehicles. And it looks like finally some of the automotive companies are beginning to actually get interested in using hydrogen as a fuel source. So that's kind of cool. When Dennis started the Institute of Economics, which, by the way, had its 30th anniversary last year. So as you can hear, Dennis was not a young man when he started, because he would have been almost 70 when he first started the Institute of Economics in 1993, because he would have been, like I said, 100 this year in 2024, so 30 years later. So actually, yeah, he would have been 70 when he was first starting the Institute. And I'm fortunate that I have a lot of the old archives from before getting involved, and because I got involved in 2009, and there were all kinds of records from the early 90s that Dennis kept. And he used to say to me and to others that he would act, he was an actor, only because it was a way to make money, that he could use that money to either donate or to take efforts to make the planet better. So that was his whole process and his whole motive for doing it. Anyway, this is a session where I'd rather talk about things that you would like to talk about. So please put some thoughts into the chat if you've got them. I always have at least one or two topics we can talk about. So today, what's hitting me as a topic that I do want to discuss is something that's kind of relevant to me right now, because I have a relatively new set of staff members in our environmental consulting business. And we've had a little bit of turnover for people that are in that area. And I've had a turnover of those. I'm sorry, stop. My watch was ringing and my phone was ringing. By the way, a discussion sometime is actually going to be about Apple and the whole controversy about Apple starting to use AI in their watches and phones and digital devices, and how some people are not happy about that. Elon Musk being one of the people that isn't, and he's even said that if Apple goes ahead and puts in the AI that they've said they're going to do into their operating systems, that he's not going to allow Apple devices to come into his facilities. So if you're a Tesla employee and you're wearing an Apple Watch, that's what that is, you'll have to leave it at the front desk before you enter the plant, because he's afraid that that device will become a way that Apple can begin to learn about his proprietary techniques and technologies. So that's a discussion topic, by the way. It's not the one that I was choosing to talk about today, but pretty big news, because he made the statement yesterday that he was going to do what I just said, which was ban any kind of Apple devices in his facility, in his facilities that he owns. I see we have some of our regulars and some new people in the audience, and I wish we had more. That's a topic. If you guys would, boy, what can I do to motivate all of you that are out there live to tell other people about these live events? We've been trying to get more. We just don't get the number of people that we'd really like to get at live events. We think all of our live events should be much more popular than they are. Our replays are very popular. I'm not at all concerned about those, but we just don't get very many people that come to our live events. Robert A. says, Javen Shively just has a 2-hour Zoom call with Paul Beckwith about climate. I'm wondering if there's going to be a recording. First place, I have no idea who Javen Shively is. I have no idea who Paul Beckwith is. And I don't, so there's no way in the world I'd know whether there's going to be a recording from some people having a Zoom call I've never even heard of. So if you would educate us about who Javen Shively is and who Paul Beckwith is and why they're important to listen to. And then Sam Clements. I don't know who that is either, Robert. I know Samuel Clements, who changed his name to Mark Twain as his alias, but I don't know who Sam Clements is, unless that's who you're talking about. And the one I'm talking about has been dead for 100 years, so I don't think it's the same person. And by the way, a little bit of a hint for all of you, we're very open about how the size of our audience is and that our live ones are very small. Why do you think that Sam Clemens or anybody you ever listen to has a large audience? Do you realize how few people actually listen to even live radio? Do you know that many shows that you probably listen to, if you listen to radio, have maybe as few as 4 or 5 listeners at any given point in time on big radio stations? Live audiences are tiny out there in the world. Shively was a Microsoft guy. Okay, so big deal. That's it. Mark Twain. I think Mark's dead, Robert. So I don't think he's got a live audience. I'm pretty sure he died 100 years plus ago. Shively is, oh, you wonder how he built an audience. Well, his audience wasn't alive. Samuel Clements, Mark Twain's audience was readers. He was an author, so he wrote books. And I don't think even at the time he was around that they did that many live events. I'm sure he did speak once he became famous, which I'm not sure he did during his lifetime. Are you guys all aware that most authors don't become famous while they're still alive? Most painters. Did you know Picasso was not very famous when he was alive? And Alicia says Ducks Unlimited has reached a new milestone, supporting conservation of 1 million acres in a fiscal year. That's cool. That's great they've done that. It's the first time in their 87-year history that landmark has been reached. Awesome. It's great that you read that and see that. By the way, does that seem like a lot of acres to you? It's not. That's a tiny amount of space. When you think about the amount of bare ground there is or acreage there is around. So a section of land is 640 acres. That's a square mile. So you could do the math. I'm not going to do it, but it's not very much space when you think about the amount of conservation there should be in the United States. There really ought to be 100 million acres, and 100 million acres is still just nothing. It's just tiny in terms of its space. But anyway, it's great that they've reached that, and I'm a huge Ducks Unlimited fan, and one of my ex-partners used to be the president of Ducks Unlimited. And it's great, but I'm sure they would really like to be able to get a lot more users. I doubt they have 1 million supporters at any one given point in time, Alicia, by the way. My guess is at any given point in time, maybe Ducks Unlimited has 1,000, 5,000 members. Over time, have more than 1 million people donated, which is what they would call a supporter, $1 or $5 or whatever. Yeah, that's probably true. And they're a great organization, and they do great things. And Alicia says, wetlands are the lungs and kidneys of this city. What city? Which city? And I didn't scroll down, so you probably have it down a little bit lower here. Because I wish that most cities believed that. I doubt that very many cities believe that the wetlands are their lungs and kidneys. Somebody believes that, but I don't know that city government officials believe that for the most part. What role did Shively have at Microsoft? Because Microsoft's had millions of employees through the years. I could look it up. Paul Shively. Let's look that up. He's a demolition and excavation contractor. I don't think the same one. Near Rocky Mount, Virginia. Director of language immersion. The Paul Shively that's known more than anything is a demolition contractor. It doesn't show Paul Shively as being much of anyone other than a demolition contractor. I don't see that he was with Microsoft. Paul Shively, Microsoft. LinkedIn. Oregon Health Authority. That's a fairly common name. So now that I look at it more broadly, I see a bunch. I don't see anybody specifically with here we go. Microsoft Office, Paul Shively, Rocket Reach. Who is he here? University of Montana. He did work at Microsoft. No, it doesn't say he worked there. Actually, his skills are in Microsoft Office. he didn't work there. So I don't know who that is. I don't know. You'll have to tell us. Who is Paul Shively? Oh, it's Javen Shively. I looked up the wrong name. Paul Beckwith is an Ottawa professor. Okay, who in the heck is that? Paul Beckwith. Ottawa.
Oops. Looks like Wayne is disconnected. He'll be right back. Hold on tight, guys. So just give us a few seconds. By the way, type in where you guys at, your location, and yeah, we'll talk about some new topics when Wayne comes in. So we'll just wait for a few minutes. Let us know where you're at in the world. So, Alicia, Colombo, the capital of Sri Lanka. Yeah, you're right. From Virginia. Okay. All right. So I'm not sure what's happening with Wayne. So I'll find out in a second. And Robert, so anybody wants to be unmuted. So, Robert, if you want to be unmuted and speak on the microphone, you're welcome to join in. Just you need to raise your hand. Okay, Wayne is back.
I don't know what happened. I just tried to open Paul Beckwith's info and it bumped.
You got disconnected for a second. Yeah, you're back.
Yeah,
All right.
bumped a little bit. Kim says hello from Sylvan Lake, Alberta, Canada. Where is Sylvan Lake in Alberta? Is it anywhere near Calgary? So Robert says, everybody wants eyeballs. It's scary what could happen if people actually built other people's audience. Well, they do. I mean, there are experts that's all they do is build audiences for other people. And James Hansen is somebody that Robert says Paul Beckwith looks at as a guru. And I'm not sure why Alicia put in that Colombo is the capital of Sri Lanka. Some reasoning for that in there. I mean, if it is, I'll trust you, and that's right. I don't know that. It's probably right. And Paul Bissonnette has said Ottawa, Ontario. It might be where you're from. Welcome. Good to have you. Did the sunspots break the connection? No, actually, I don't know what happened because I clicked on something I was looking at about Paul Beckwith, and I can just tell from a little bit of listening, he's a really good speaker. And did Ken put in between Calgary and Edmonton? Okay. I'm a huge Heartland fan of the show that's been on it. And now is going into its 18th season, 17th or 18th season. And it's filmed in a little place called, I think it's High Point. It's either Hightown or High Point. They call it Hudson, but that's not the name really. And they actually use the downtown Hudson High Point area to name as Hudson. And there's a little cafe there called Maggie's that is actually there, and it's called Maggie's. That's the real name. So that's kind of cool. And Hansen is a famous NASA scientist, has been around for decades. Awesome. So GTC, what was the whole point of that, Alicia? Georgia Transmission Corporation is a high electric transmission cooperative that builds and maintains high voltage transmission lines. They build 30 miles of new lines and 10 substations per year. Okay, great. Sri Lanka transforms former dumps into flood buffering wetlands parks. That's great. And so does the US, by the way. And so does Canada. So does every country in the world, probably. Do they do it enough? Probably not. Again, one project here in the US could probably get all kinds of publicity. But does that mean that we're doing enough just because one city is turning a dump into a flood buffering wetland? No, doesn't mean that at all. It just means one city's doing it or whatever. It's good, but it's not world transforming by any means. And I don't know what level Sri Lanka is doing it. I don't know whether Sri Lanka is very progressive, very ahead of the times in terms of what they do. I've not really studied Sri Lanka. Anyway, you guys are being awesome today, throwing in all kinds of topics to talk about. I'm going to look that one up real quick, just see if Sri Lanka dump transformation. The Prime Minister opens Sri Lanka's first waste-to-energy power plant. That's great. You know, there are waste-to-energy power plants in the U.S., a number of them. The Aruakalua landfill in Puttalam, Sri Lanka, is a sanitary landfill. It's a long-term solution to an ongoing waste problem. It's a big dump. Hazardous garbage dumping, new waste-to-energy projects in Sri Lanka. Again, all this sounds great. It is great. I'm not meaning to make it sound lowly, but we've done a lot of this in the U.S. too. But it is so minor compared to the normal way that we deal with waste, which, by the way, hasn't changed in forever in the U.S. We still, almost every major metropolitan area, and let's define what that means. Let's say any city with a population of more than 100,000 has got this facility somewhere close to its city that looks like a big pile, looks like they're building a mountain, which is their landfill. And it's the same way that trash was thrown away 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Landfills have been around forever. What's different now is that those newer city landfills have probably got liners that would keep anything leaching from them and moving down into the soil. That would keep that waste from harming adjacent areas. But the concept of a landfill itself as being where a vast majority of our trash goes hasn't changed. And these waste to energy projects just haven't happened. There are a few of them here and there, but if you look at the number that should be out there, they're not there. We don't have them. It's sad, but it's just not the case. I wish we worried more about that than we do about some of the things that we think are going to change the world's energy wasting circumstances or climate or whatever that they might be changing. But we have not ultimately really changed the way we get rid of waste in the history of mankind. That's a sad story. So Robert asks, who is it in Saudi Arabia that got behind restoration of such a huge 10,000s of acres mangrove? I don't know who, but again, that's a tiny amount of acres in Saudi Arabia. It sounds great, but it's not very much acreage. That link is great. I'm not going to look it up because, again, it's going to be touting that project, whatever it is. But again, it's not that big. So we have to be careful what we say, because Alicia, to make a broad statement that Sri Lanka transforms former dumps into flood buffering wetland parks makes it sound like it's just this awesome thing that's all they do over there is change dumps into wetlands. No, they don't. There's one in the whole country, probably. And there might be more than one, but I doubt it. We aren't doing much worldwide to really protect this planet, certainly not to make it better. We just aren't. I wish we were. We're all of us that are here on this webinar podcast care about the planet, or we wouldn't even be here. But unfortunately, we are a very tiny minority of people out there. People will talk, but talk is cheap. The old saying, which I've said many times, is our talk talks and our walk talks, but our walk talks louder than our talk talks. It's a lot of times it's said your walk talks and your talk talks, but your talk walks your walk talks louder than your talk talks. So we can say things, but that isn't really what means anything. It's what we do. How do we live? Okay, I think I'm kind of caught up on the questions and comments. Keep throwing them in there. I'll get back to them. But what I wanted to briefly talk about today is one of the things about kind of the environment and environmental sciences is I'm educating a new staff of people right now. And today we were talking about an environmental assessment and how you do that on a piece of property. And I was explaining some things about environmental contaminants, and I realized that there's a whole series of words, a vernacular that we use in the environmental world, which is probably distant for most people. They don't quite understand it. So maybe we should do a better job of just educating about things. So I'm going to just do a little education here. If there is something in the air in this room where I'm sitting that is dangerous to my health, there's 3 ways that it can get into my body: through my nose or mouth, through what's called inhalation. I can inhale it. And obviously I'm sitting here talking and breathing, air coming in through my nose, air coming in through my mouth. That's inhalation. And if there are harmful things in the air in this room, then I am what we call polluting or contaminating or intoxicating. Most of the time people use intoxicate related to alcohol, but the word is broader. I'm toxifying my body. I'm breathing bad things. The second way that things in this room, and this bottle is a good example, that can get into my body is through ingestion. So when I drink, I'm ingesting. And I ingest liquids, which we call drinking, and I ingest solids, which we call eating. And again, if there were contaminants in the air in this room, it'd be a little less easy for those to get into my body through ingestion, but they could, because just this bottle sitting open in this room, which I did have it closed, but if it's just sitting and there's bad stuff in the air in this room, and it ends up getting in the water that's in here, and I ingest it, it could create problems for me. So that is another way. The third way is through what we call dermal contact, our skin touching things. A little less likely that that could be problematic for something in the air in this room. However, there are some contaminants, and here's the interchangeable words: contaminant, and then what occurs from contaminants, which is contamination; pollutant, what occurs from pollution, pollutants is pollution; and toxicant, what occurs from toxicants is toxification. Dermal contact here in this room of the desk, of the computer screen, of the camera is unlikely to really present a problem to me unless I'm really ingesting by licking, because our pores and our skin are not likely to be affected by the kinds of things that might be here in the air in this room, although they could be, but probably not likely in this room. So if we were going to determine whether there was anything harmful in this room, we'd want to test the air. We want to test surfaces, see if anything's on them. We'd want to test anything that might be sitting in this room that we would ingest, take into our bodies. And then we put together all that information and ultimately, hopefully, find a conclusion to our fear about whether there was a contamination that we were being affected by. So in the environmental world, we do what are called phase 1 environmental assessments. And typically, those are the first phase of what we do to analyze whether a site, a location, could be just a piece of land. It could be a piece of land with a building on it. It could be, really, those would be the two types. So a piece of land or a piece of land with a building on it. And if there's a building on a piece of land and we want to find out whether that land and that building is got a problem, we would have to look at circumstances associated with both the land and with the building. If it's just a piece of land, then we could just look at the association of the things that are just affecting the land itself. And until 1990, there was no standardized procedure for doing those environmental assessments. Everybody did them just any way they possibly wanted to. In the late 1980s, there was a move that occurred internationally to standardize phase 1 environmental assessments, to where when you conduct a phase 1 environmental assessment today, or if you read the results of one in a report, you are pretty sure that it was done using a real standardized process that involves a combination of looking at existing data about the site, information that's available, observing the site, using all your senses to do that. And you've heard me say that, unfortunately, we as humans don't take as much advantage of all of our senses a lot of the times when we're dealing with environmental issues. Usually we will use our sight, our eyes, and we'll use our nose, we'll use our sense of smell, because if things just smell wrong, we usually think, whoa, that's not good, we need to get away from it. Rarely do we use our sense of touch, which there's the dermal contact. Rarely do we use our sense of hearing, unless it's some really obvious noise pollution that we're dealing with. And we do use our sense of taste. So, however, we don't see people walking around licking things to determine about whether they're a problem. I just saw a note from Robert. I'm going to change my frame of thought for just a second. Too bad about Kajabi, you say, Robert. I can't easily go and get my notes without breaking the continuity and just dropping the connection for a while here. Really? Well, Webinar Jam, we chose to go with it because you can actually, it shouldn't disconnect any differently or or not than when we used Kajabi. And frankly, we didn't use Kajabi very much. We actually broadcasted to, no, we didn't even do that. I was going to say that's wrong, stating that. We used GoToWebinar for a lot more of our 8 years of doing this, and all the different, close to 2,000 now, maybe it is 2,000 even, of these sessions that we've done. We used GoToWebinar more than we used anything else. We broadcasted over Facebook Live and over YouTube, and what else, Mark? Where else do we cast to?
Just Facebook and YouTube. Two places.
Yeah. But we have at other times done it in a few other vehicles.
Right.
I don't know why it would be disconnecting for you. So I don't get it. I'm just reading another note here. Alicia says the rivers and tributaries of the Amazon rainforest hold about 1/5 of the Earth's fresh water. I knew it was a lot. I didn't know whether that number is accurate. Nourishing a stunning variety of mammals, birds, plants, and amphibians. It also helps support 47 million people in the surrounding basin region, which includes mountains, forests, wetlands, river systems. Okay, great. Yep, good little info about them, about that area. Anyway, and you asked, Alicia, about thoughts about microplastics in the air, water, and food. Huge problem. Absolutely an issue. If you have the detection ability to look at the excrement, pee, poop from different kinds of organisms, and you have to have really pretty amazing equipment to be able to do that, you'll find small pieces of plastic in just about every organism's waste. That shouldn't be, and we shouldn't be seeing that. I mean, it's just horrendous. What's more important, though, isn't what they get rid of. It's what stays in their body, in our bodies, and what affects us then. And plastics break down slowly in most cases, so they're not breaking down in our bodies. Oh, excuse me. Usually we probably are ultimately getting rid of them, but if they're incredibly small, then they're staying there. And now they're going to probably create respiratory problems from clogging, vascular problems from creating potential blockages in our arteries and veins. So a huge issue, no question. Anyway, back to my environmental. I think I've gotten through the questions and comments that are there. If you're doing an environmental assessment, I wonder where that clicked up there. Please put any thoughts you have in, everybody. There's a bunch of you that are in the audience that haven't put anything in. Put some stuff in, if you would. Just thoughts, questions, whatever. When you're doing an environmental assessment and you've got all these words you got to use, like toxicants and pollutants and contaminants, a real key is that you got to be able to communicate the results of it to others. And the phase one is when you're doing it without doing any sampling. And we call that invasive. So if I wipe my finger on something here, and I grab particles onto my finger and I'm able to analyze those, that's not invasive because I'm not destroying the integrity of this shirt. If I were to do something like ripping it or scraping it so hard that I actually took parts of it, that would be invasive. If I drill a hole in soil and go down and grab some of the soil, that's invasive. If I put a hole in the wall here, that's invasive. Invasive sampling is expensive. It's more difficult than just observation sampling or grabbing something. So if you grab air, which you could do in this room with a sampler that you put onto a bottle and collect the air in the bottle or collect it on a filter of some kind, that's not invasive. It's easier to do. So over the years, we've actually improved air quality dramatically all over the world. It's still very bad in some parts of the world, but even in those places, we've improved it because a lot of cases is because it's a lot easier to sample. It's a lot easier. We can just grab it as it comes out of the exhaust of a vehicle, for example, and have testing units that are sitting right along streets or in parking lots or whatever. Not so easy to do with liquids or solid materials. So in areas that we seem to make more progress as it relates to environmental problems, air is one of them because it's easier to sample. It's also easier to clean. You know, in my office here, I have a air conditioning unit. We call it air conditioning because it's not just raising or lowering the temperature. It's also taking the air that goes into it and it's filtering out harmful things that could be in that air that would get into the air that's in the room that I'm breathing. See, we've got a couple more comments. I want to get to those. I guess not. That was the last of them here. So an environmental assessment goes from an observation level when you aren't doing anything invasive to an invasive level where you're actually gathering samples of materials, you're sending them off to a laboratory and having them analyzed, and you're getting the results back. Then you're interpreting those results and using knowledge that you've gotten as an environmental professional from hopefully education and experience in the workplace, observation, hopefully years of it in many cases in the workplace or wherever else that you're using it. That then gets turned into some kind of a document that other people can read, and you can then take from that the knowledge that you need to have to then help you go to what we call phase 3. So phase 1 is non-invasive. Phase 2 involves invasive sampling and analysis. Phase 3 involves, I'm going to just call it broadly, cleanup. And that could also be called remediation or improvement of an environment. So the whole process of environmental improvement goes from assessment at the phase 1 level to assessment at the phase 2 level, and then ultimately remediation, cleanup. It's also very sad that in the 50 years that I've been around the environmental world, there are very few technology improvements in remediation. Huge numbers of improvements in assessment, better equipment, better technologies, better ways to interpret. So Robert says interpretation is everything. That's true. But in actual cleanup or remediation, we still clean up water in much the same way we did 50 years ago. We have not improved the technology involved in the cleanup side very much at all. Air is a little different story. As a matter of fact, I am writing a book right now. Mark, why don't you pull up Designer and pull up the new book that I just started writing, and Mark's helping me with, and share the screen, which I think you can do, on both the electronic technologies, so PEMF, as well
Okay.
as the one that we just started to write.
Okay.
Mark's going to grab these, everybody. I drank all my water. By the way, this is a brand of water that I'm excited about. I've had it for a while, but I started drinking more. It's ionized and a little bit alkaline, so it's pH of about 8.6, 8.7. So it's a little on the alkaline side. Pretty good evidence that alkaline water has some benefits for people. Again, interpretation is everything. So just as I say that, you probably find people that make water treatment systems that make water acidic claim that acidic water is better for you than alkaline water would be. So again, interpretation is everything. I think Mark's going to pull up this designer site.
Yeah. Yeah, just give me a second. I'll pull it up here. Mm, okay.
Oh, excuse me. I'm not tired. I don't know why I'm yawning. Been sitting down too much here today. Working. I've been lately not have to do that as much. When we decided that asbestos was a hazard, we acted to get rid of it. It took 5 generations approximately. That's interesting. I'm trying to do the math in my head. I've been around as a professional in the environmental world for 50 years. That's 2 generations. Generation is typically thought of as 20 to 25 years. And when I first started, nobody cared a lick about asbestos in the early 70s. It wasn't until the late 70s that asbestos, so less than 2 full generations ago. So it's interesting that you said we really thought about it being a hazard. I don't think that overall people thought about it being a hazard 50 years ago. They did 20, they did 30 or 40. The late 70s is when they really did. Here's the 2 books that recently started to do some writing on them. Oh, Mark, you've got it. So pull up the living pain-free. Yeah.
Okay, I might have to like stop and start again because it doesn't go to the new tab. Try
Okay.
this.
Um,
All right, here it is.
so this is not that new. It's been around for 20. I'm going to answer your question here about asbestos in just a second, Robert, because that is an area that I'm pretty well knowledgeable. Don't focus on the cover look of this, but and an early form of cryptographic electronic payments that has nothing to do with the book. We're just barely starting, but just scroll down a little bit, Mark. Let's just start to show up everybody that we're a little bit of what we're doing. Have you worked on this enough, Mark, that this is set the table's contents is accurate, or are we there yet?
Actually, I haven't worked on this one yet. I don't think.
Well,
Yeah, I worked on the other one. Yeah.
this is a new technology, but still not really that new. So let's use that and let's talk about asbestos for a little bit more. Robert puts in, wasn't it recently officially banned completely? That's what they want you to think, Robert, and it's not true. Asbestos is still used in manufacturing in two things that, and I'm not sure the ban goes as far as to take it out of these, and I don't think it does, but then that's brake pads and also any kind of a padding that's used to slow a process down. So it really would break, but pads used in manufacturing. The ban was for any kind of building material. And that's accurate that it just recently was banned. The ban hasn't taken effect yet, though. When you hear about a ban, what you're hearing about is some government agency has created a bill or an act or something and has said, we're going to do this, but doesn't mean that it's happened. When people started to realize there were problems associated with inhalation of asbestos in the late 70s, there were steps taken, including banning it in insulation, which is where it was more often found than anything else. So the ban started in the late 70s, and it started with a very limited group of product types. And over the years, it just has been expanding. But it's completely inaccurate to say that it's completely banned and officially banned today. And yet that's what most people think. Because that's what the press said. But it is not banned. And yet it has been removed. I do think your analogy is a good one. We've done more to deal with asbestos as a problem environmentally than probably we have with any other broadly used type of contaminant. And we've done it for one real reason, and it's a bad reason, but it's the reason we have. The two diseases that are caused by exposure to asbestos that are horrible and they're fatal. One's called mesothelioma, which is a form of cancer, and the second is asbestosis, which is a form of emphysema, a way in which your lungs get clogged. It's not a cancer, so it's not a growth, but mesothelioma is a growth. Both of those diseases are only caused by asbestos exposure. Because of that, the legal field loves them, because lawyers representing plaintiffs, people affected by that asbestos exposure, can go to court and win verdicts very easily, because the defendants, those defending the manufacturers, let's say, of those materials, cannot say, how can you prove that it was asbestos that caused those people to die? They can't, because it's the only contaminant that I'm aware of that creates a disease that is only caused by that particular contaminant. Other environmental contaminants, let's say microplastics. If you were to get cancer and a doctor were to say you got it because you were exposed to huge levels of microplastics, if I was defending a microplastics manufacturer that you were suing, I'd go, Mr. Lawyer, how can you prove that your client was affected by my plastic? How can you prove that? How can you say that it wasn't affected by this or that or the other thing? And that lawyer wouldn't be able to prove that. Well, there's good evidence that it was, and there's a whole bunch of your microplastics in my client's guts. And and there is in their poop there was before they died. So, and you can win those cases, and lawyers do, but it's difficult because, and microplastics isn't the best example, but water quality contaminants like a chemical called trichloroethylene that is clearly a cancer-causing chemical. It's clearly widely out in the environment, but it's been very difficult to ever sue any companies that manufactured TCE because all kinds of other things create exactly the same medical problems that TCE exposure does. And that's the problem with a lot of environmental issues, is that it isn't just one thing that creates the problem that people have. It's all kinds of things that create them. And so it's really hard to get settlements. Asbestos is not that same thing. If you get asbestosis or mesothelioma, you got it because you were exposed to asbestos. Nothing else. No other contaminants like that. Robert says Parkinson's disease too, right? For what, Robert? Is Parkinson's only caused by one thing? I thought Parkinson's was somewhat genetic even. Asbestosis is not genetic. You only get asbestosis because you get exposed to asbestos. You only get mesothelioma because you get exposed. Somebody raised their hand to speak. It is really late in the day, everybody, and I actually have a need to go today. We can open it up for a second if whoever it was, Mark, why don't you see who asked to speak? It's Robert.
Robert, yes.
Real quick, Robert, if you want to unmute him, Mark.
All right, Robert, go ahead and raise your hand one more time. I thought, yeah, I had him on for a second, and I think he disappeared. So
Okay.
I don't know what happened there.
Well, get it next week. You guys are awesome, very loyal. Appreciate you so much. But we are at the top of the hour here. I want to be loyal to our listening audience that does replays. And they, a lot of times, just want to listen for X periods of time. You guys are awesome. And today, as always, I always enjoy doing this. Hopefully it's informative. You learn from it. You get some value from it. You enjoy it. Mark, why don't you take us out?